Financial Planner, follow us on YouTube.
Ameer Rosic runs a website called blockgeeks.com. And again, if you go to his website, you'll be able to plug in with him. Very educational. Ameer, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Well, Ameer, let's start off with kind of how you got involved in this, because you're now, you have a pretty big presence out there with the blockchain and cryptocurrencies. When did you have your aha moment and get into this space?
It was all by accident, like most businesses. It comes out of necessity or just kind of falls into place. My background is I'm in the online space, e-commerce, SaaS type of thing, marketing, growth hacking, etc. And maybe it was like 3 years ago, I had my clothing company, and I was doing a bunch of marketing for some companies on the side. And then one of my good friends, they said, "Hey, man, help out these Bitcoin companies." So I started helping them with marketing a little bit on the side. And at the exact same time, my buddy Dimitri Buterin, which is his son is Vitalik Buterin, he was starting to release Ethereum. So I got exposed all of a sudden to Ethereum and then all these Bitcoin blockchain companies. And I'm like, okay, this is quite interesting. And I did hear about Bitcoin before. I'm like, oh yeah, that internet money thing. But once I dove in and I really understood the power of the technology and what it represents, I made that decision then and there. I'm like, I need to be involved full time.
Yeah. So once you took that step, I mean, you obviously you have blockgeeks.com. It's an educational site. You put out a lot of free content out there on YouTube where people can learn all kinds of things about these currencies and the different opportunities. So what is blockgeeks.com?
So BlockGeeks focuses on educating developers and educating C-level people and just educating anybody in general. I made BlockGeeks out of my own need because when I was trying to educate myself, I was asking everybody, hey, what are the best resources for learning about this stuff? Like, oh, you got to go on Reddit, you got to go on these forums, you got to do Google search. I'm like, you're telling me Bitcoin's been around for more than 7 years and there's not one really easy resource I can go to and just plug in. I'm like, okay, my background is, building online businesses. I'm like, okay, I'll just build that for myself. And then I started seeing a need for training developers online. So basically we have a section in BlockGeeks. It's a self-studied, you got to study at your own pace, kind of like Udacity and Udemy model, where we train people both on the C-level aspect. So if you want to learn blockchain on a non-technical aspect, and also if you want to learn on a technical aspect, what is Solidity. So we can consider us like edutech company.
Sure. Okay. So now on the cryptocurrencies themselves, do you have a preference? Do you have a favorite?
No, I don't have any favorites whatsoever. I think we're still in the experimental stages, and I think a lot of things can still happen. Bitcoin can be gone tomorrow, and we'll see a new champion in place. But for me, I just like seeing the evolution of what's going on. I love the fact that more people are getting involved in the actual industry. So I don't really have favorites.
Yeah, I was at a conference in 2012, and it was basically entrepreneurs and hardcore Bitcoin enthusiasts like libertarians or geeks.
Well, look, don't get me wrong. Like the closest thing I can consider myself is a libertarian, but I don't like labels, and I don't agree with a lot of things libertarians agree with as well. But I'm also not a Bitcoin maximalist. I don't believe in absolutes. I don't believe in like this way or the highway. For me, I'm a firm believer in the free market. I'm a firm believer in studying in nature. So as an entrepreneur, like at my core, I love building businesses. I tell people the more the merrier. Go out there, experiment, try, fail, try new things, get up, and the more that we can actually add value and experiment in the marketplace, the more feedback we can have. And with this feedback, we can have better decision making for the future.
Sure. Yeah. And so 2012, that was what it was. And then I just went to a conference just this week in Houston, and it was sponsored by Microsoft. The speakers were data scientists and engineers from ExxonMobil, BHP Billiton, Halliburton, and Chevron. And Microsoft was also there. And it just blew me away to see that, the blockchain itself will be implemented. So is it safe to say that certainly the cryptocurrencies are speculative, but the blockchain is absolutely going to happen and is being implemented all around the world?
Yeah, it's going to be implemented. I do want to kind of clarify two things when people talk about blockchain. There's different iterations of blockchain. For example, you have a private blockchain, which big Fortune 500 companies would use, and then you have a public blockchain such as Ethereum, Monero, and Bitcoin. And those are two different things. So I think a lot of companies, what they're trying to figure out is how does this technology fit into my ecosystem? How am I going to slowly wean off my legacy platforms? How does this change my business model? How does it change my security model? So it's a work in progress, and I believe that we are at the beginnings of every single company in one format or the next will be using one aspect of a blockchain.
Yeah, I noticed all these companies too, these large companies. I didn't hear anybody really mention Bitcoin, but they all were using the Ethereum platform. So is Ethereum, what are your thoughts on Ethereum versus Bitcoin for everyday users?
They're two different things. And funny you bring this up. I just made a post about this today. Like, we are still a whiles away, maybe like 2 to 4 years from this actually scaling blockchain. Like, for example, Ethereum is roughly around, let's say, 14 transactions per second per node right now. If you create an ERC20 token right now, that gets cut in half to 7 transactions per second. Imagine if you're a big, massive financial institution or you're a new dApp you build on top of Ethereum, you can only run 7 transactions per second. That's a joke. Like, blockchains are not good at storing data. They're extremely sluggish and slow right now, currently that is. So I think we still have a long way to go before we see the promise of blockchain, or the promise that people are saying about blockchain. So we still need to be focusing on the protocol layers, like, let's say, example, in Ethereum, proof of stake, in Bitcoin, you have the Lightning Network, state channels, all these other side channels coming up. So we still need to be focusing on creating the actual structure of this industry.
In your opinion, what is the best way to invest in this space?
Depends on what value you can add, honestly. Whether you're an entrepreneur, start focusing on building up protocol layers or actually solving real problems in the space. Whether you're an investor trying to figure out if you can back human beings. Like, I do angel investing, and for me, and Chris Sacca talks about this too. One of the things I look for investing is I don't look for the actual product. I don't actually look for the technology behind it. I look for the individual. Does the individual have the chutzpah? Does the individual, I'm giving money to this individual to execute on his promise. So I tell people, all depends on what kind of value you can add to the space, whether that is your services, whether that is your finances, whether that is your knowledge as an advisor. So there's many different ways you can actually help this space to actually grow.
What about for those people who are speculators, whether it's ICO or buying Bitcoin or Ethereum, or even there are publicly traded companies now?
I don't really invest in ICOs whatsoever. I think ICOs are a house of cards are about to fall down within the next year or two.
It's a pretty bold prediction from somebody who's such an enthusiast. So for that's good advice for people. So avoid the ICOs. Now, when it comes to the big ones, if somebody wants to speculate, what are some of the ones that you think, hey, these have a really good shot? Obviously, Bitcoin, Ethereum, any others?
Yeah, those are but you just hit on something important. That's a big difference between Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, Litecoin, and Zcash, as opposed to somebody wanting to speculate on a token. You're talking about open source, decentralized cryptocurrencies, as opposed to somebody that wants to speculate and invest in a centralized token built on top of Ethereum. Those are like comparing a banana to an apple. So yeah, I'm very bullish. I love the open source decentralized cryptocurrencies. I love Monero. I love Bitcoin. I love Litecoin. I love Zcash. I think they all have a utility, a purpose. They have an amazing dev team behind them. A lot of people focusing on very complicated problems. Very high level problems are quite difficult to overcome. And then all these other ICOs who are doing their ERC20 tokens on top of Ethereum, I think they're just running in for the money. Now, there's obviously diamonds in the rough. There's a couple of them that actually have proper product market fit, have an actual team that can execute this, and actually figured out ways that the technology can work for them. So right now, it's the same thing that's happened during the dot-com boom, where a bunch of money came in, shell companies were created for IPOs, promises on technologies that couldn't deliver, and people were just caught up in FOMOnomics, fear of missing out economics. And you know the end of that story. A lot of people lost a lot of money.
Sure. What would you say that people living in the United States, Western world, what is the disconnect, or what are they not seeing that perhaps people in Africa or China or India are seeing when it comes to these cryptocurrencies, or Argentina or Venezuela for that matter? Because I've spoken to most of the people who live, and I'm throwing out a big blanket here, but for the most part, we're speculating, many of us that are entering this space. But I've spoken to people who live in India and China, and this has nothing to do with speculation. They need Bitcoin. They need Bitcoin because they need an honest way to transact with each other without the government interfering or without some sort of devaluation.
You just answered your question. We don't need it here. We're too comfortable. And you know the analogy of the frog? If you put a frog in hot boiling water, the frog jumps out. But if you put a frog in warm water and slowly you increase the temperature of the water, and the frog will actually cook because the frog doesn't notice a change in the water. That's what's happening to us in North America. You have the government, big government, big brother creeping bit by bit, taking away our liberties bit by bit, increasing taxes bit by bit. And hey, it's okay. We don't really notice. The next thing you know, we turn around, we got 50% tax rates. A bunch of our liberties are taken away. But countries like China, countries like India, countries like, let's say, continent Africa, Russia, it's a necessity. It's a different story. You mentioned Venezuela. For God's sakes, I'm hearing stories that people need to go into zoos to get animals just to survive, just to feed themselves and their family. So yeah, Bitcoin does play a role or Monero, which is even better, more secure, ring signature, the decentralized cryptocurrency, where I can send money to people in Venezuela that actually need it, and they can use it as tender, legal tender between them and their comrades over there. So yeah, you're right. Those places are much more bullish on this technology, and they need it much more than we do.
China's made news recently because it banned ICOs, and then now it's making news because I don't think they banned the exchanges.
They didn't ban. I'll tell you what China's doing exactly. No different than what's going to happen in Russia, and no different than any of the smart countries who actually want to capitalize on this in Dubai as well. China's banning them so they can get more control, so they can create economic zones like Guangzhou, like Macau, and so they can have their own privateered Chinese businesses in those economic zones so they can benefit from it and control it, as opposed to having Westerns out there. Same thing like if Uber wanted to do business in China, guess what? They had to be bought by Chinese companies. Same thing with Walmart, same thing with McDonald's. The Chinese want to own and dominate their own thing, so they're just creating right now an economic zone so they control everything. And they won't ban it. It's a temporary ban while they take control of everything.
That's a great point. Jamie Dimon, I believe JP Morgan was an early investor in Ethereum. Essentially, is this somebody just trashing Ethereum's competitor?
No, when you have decentralized platforms, whether it's like Ethereum or Bitcoin or Monero, these open source protocols, it's very difficult to compare that with a privatized company. I always look at people working on projects. You can go on GitHub, you can go on Stack Exchange, you can even go on Reddit, you can even go on BlockGeeks, and actually see people working on problems. Right now, Ethereum, Bitcoin, Monero, Zcash, Litecoin, they have a lot of very smart engineers working on these problems, as opposed to if you go on other, let's say, companies or applications, there's not too many of these individuals working on it. So I'm a firm believer that the companies I'm a firm believer in open source decentralized currencies, not opposed to these tokens. Tokens do serve a purpose in very select cases as a utility, but if we're moving forward, if we want to get away from the shackles of the Federal Reserve System, away from quantitative easing, away from printing money, away from the worst tax possible, which is inflation at 2% minimum per year, we got to have a currency like Bitcoin that is censorship proof, that is decentralized, that is open source, that anybody in the world that wants to add a BIP, Bitcoin Improvement Protocol, they can. So that's what I'm quite bullish about, that I want people to focus on.
That's a great point. You bring up a lot of things that a lot of people who invest in gold do. Do you think Bitcoin and gold are allies essentially against this Federal Reserve System?
Well, they should be, but there's a lot of gold bugs who are kind of against it, which I don't understand it. I'm like, Bitcoin's right up your alley. You should really look into it.
It's very true, and we were talking about libertarians earlier. That is right up the alley. So, when you travel to these different conferences and stuff, you're seeing a lot of smart people trying to solve a lot of problems. What's something amongst all the noise right now around Bitcoin because of the price volatility and different things? What are some of the things that you see out in 2018, 2019 that has you excited?
Scaling the network. I want to see Lightning Network to do more. I want to see SegWit be activated more than 50%. That's for Bitcoin. I want to see better wallets. better integrations of wallets. I think the UX interface of most wallets are horrendous. So the usability, the ease of use, the whole UX experience has to be better. For Ethereum, I'm excited for proof of stake. So Metropolis is being launched maybe in a month or two. Then slowly Casper starts being released maybe around Christmas, running parallel blocks between proof of stake and proof of work. I'm excited to see what Zcash is doing with ZK Snarks. So these protocol layer things that offer scalability so millions of users can actually use it, that's what I'm quite happy about.
Is there any way for the average person to make money from the mining of these cryptocurrencies? Because I remember in the early days, I mean, I literally had a video guy who was doing it 24 hours a day in his house.
Yeah, there's some, proof of stake, you won't even need cards soon. Like next year, you're just going to need to stake your Ether virtually. So they take mining completely out away from the GPUs and the physical cards. Also, there's a bunch, Cosmos is going to have that. I know EOS is doing something like that, delegated proof of stake. So I think more and more of these open source platforms will be using POS. But Monero, you can still mine. I think you can still do Zcash. I think any of the standard proof of work models, except Bitcoin, you can still mine.
Sure. And then what about some of these companies that offer up where you invest with them and they mine on your behalf?
Honest to God, I can't even comment on that too much because I haven't really looked into it. I know there's one big one. It's like Genesis Mining that does that.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Well, when it comes to Block Geeks, everybody, I've been to the website. My partner actually goes there regularly. A lot of education. You cannot not go to this guy's YouTube channel or his website and come out thinking you don't have a pretty good awareness and understanding of this stuff. Very interesting. Everybody check out blockgeeks.com. Again, Ameer Rosic, thank you so much for your time. I hope to talk to you again, sir.
Likewise. Have a great day.